So you find a lot of us were parented out of fear and not necessarily respect. When you've come from a place where you're super passive and you're learning to be assertive, chances are you're going to get into being aggressive, and then you'll come back to being assertive. You can name what happened to you and how it made you feel without villainizing your parents. One thing that I will say 521 times, stop waiting for the apology, because their acknowledgement of what they did and their apology does not validate your pain.
Ready, set, let's go. I'm on the way up. I'm on the way up. I'm on the way up, going all the way up. I'm on the way up. I'm on the way up. I'm on the way up, going all the way up.
And you're watching the SNS. Gratitude to Longonot Place for providing us with their serviced apartments as a shoot location. Now, they are situated off Harithuku Road and are ideal for individuals who are seeking long-term or short-term accommodation. For more information, feel free to check our description box down below. Now, joining us today is someone who's been here before. Was it 2 years? Has it been 2 years now?
Yeah, 2 years.
And we just turned 2. Okay,
Yeah.
we turned 2 like last month, but
So
same old.
Oh my God.
You're an OG.
Privilege.
Yeah. Introduce yourself.
Hi. Yeah, so my name is Wendy Madheka. Wendy Madheka. I'm a psychotherapist specifically for women. I don't see, I only see women. And yeah, I think I'm also a serial entrepreneur and many things. I'm a lover of notebooks. I'm a lover of Harry Potter. I'm a lover of life, freedom, beauty, all that jazz. So that's basically who I am.
Thank you so much for coming, Wendy.
Thank
I
you.
think the first time we had you, it was in 2023.
Yes.
Maybe somewhere in the beginning.
Yeah.
So today we have invited Wendy because we wanted to have a very important conversation, and this is on debunking our childhood, and we dedicate this episode specifically to most millennials and I think the later Gen Zs, and growing up with emotionally abusive parents. That is, if this is your experience. So first things first, this conversation was inspired by a post I came across online. I've been trying to find it again, but to no luck. And before we begin, we'd like to make something very clear, that this conversation is in no way to blame, to ridicule, or to villainize our parents. Our parents did the best that they could with the tools and the knowledge and the emotional capacity they had at the time. And we recognize the sacrifices they made, the resilience they passed on, and the values they instilled in us. However, gratitude and truth can coexist. So we can be thankful for our upbringing and still name the parts of it that were emotionally harmful, because that is a reality for a lot of us.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
Wendy, we want to hear from your professional opinion. When you hear the term emotionally abusive parenting, and we wanted this conversation to be centered around the Kenyan context, what comes to mind?
When it comes to emotionally abusive parenting, I think of something that has been normalized, something that doesn't have as much language.
Yeah.
And it's been wrapped around or wrapped under culture, discipline, religion. And it comprises of a lot of things that we feel is just, that thing that we just say, oh, it's just African parents. Slow down, guys. Like, it's, Anyway, so emotional abusive parenting can look like constant criticism, can look like comparison, can look like emotional unavailability or dismissing and minimizing of your feelings. It can look like, how do I put this? Weaponized sacrifice, you know, where yes, our parents did sacrifice, but then it's now not like you sacrifice, so now I have to do what specifically you would want. So it's a very complex and wide area that sometimes we may dismiss or we may excuse without the understanding and without the knowledge, just because also there's a lot of many things which I think we'll get into as we go. And it also goes to the extreme of parents who actually hate their kids. And it shows, like, truly, the way you're treating your child does not show an ounce of love. But that's not all the experiences. Of course, with everything, there's a spectrum where there's the small things which you weren't aware of. And we have to give grace to the fact that our parents didn't have the same skills, the same tools, resources, knowledge that we fortunately do have and are privileged to have. So when they were parenting in this way, they were parenting out of what they knew was best.
Yeah.
A lot of them didn't even grow up being told I love you even in the first place, or even a hug, or even having any emotional connection. So are we shocked that they don't know how to be emotionally correct, I guess, in parenthood. Yeah.
Okay, so when we are defining emotional abuse in the Kenyan or African context, we paint a scenario like a parent who consistently or constantly compares you to your siblings or cousins. A phrase a lot of us have grown up with is, why can't you be more like so-and-so? You know, so-and-so got at this, and what is your excuse? And as much as even in regards to my childhood, it was often seen as motivation, what impact does it have on a child's self-esteem and sense of identity?
Okay, that's a very good question. Yeah, because in that way, when your parents are asking that, they're not, obviously they were coming, and throughout this whole conversation, it's important to realize that two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
There can be gratitude, there can be understanding, but there can also be accountability, right? There can also be pain, in as much as we can understand where our parents were coming from. So in a situation where there's a lot of comparison, obviously our parents were coming from a place of wanting us to be better or trying to push us to be better. But unfortunately, that creates the narrative, or it sends the message that there's something wrong with me. I can't be like this, and I'm never going to be enough. I'm never going to earn your respect and your love if I'm not this, if I'm not this way. So you start to internalize that, and then now you become even you're starting to compare yourself with everyone else. You feel like you're not living up. You become super critical of yourself. So essentially your self-esteem will go lower, because it just feels like you're always trying to catch up with something, always trying to fit into a narrative or who someone would want you to be, and you're not being given really space to be yourself. Because I may not be like Steph, but maybe there are things that I can do that Steph can't do, and that's okay. There's space for all of us to exist and to thrive in that way. So I feel like it does have a really significant impact on our self-esteem.
And just to, you know, continue with the conversation on what emotional abuse looks like, even in the African and Kenyan context, there's always the idea of respecting your elders, you know, and how this idea has made it difficult for not only Kenyan but just African children in general to speak up or set boundaries with figures of authority in families, like parents. So an example, you try to express that something your parents said hurt you, and they respond with, who do you think you're talking to, you know, or who are you to tell me X, Y, and Z? So why do these responses, outside of the difficulty when it comes to cultural silence, prevent children, and especially those of us growing up, expressing our emotions then?
So how do these
responses unataka kuongeleshana nani hivyo, unadhani uko ni wapi, etc.
I think we have to acknowledge that there's a culture of reverence towards elders, which makes sense. It's okay to respect our elders, but the problem with such statements is it makes respect equal to silence. It makes fear and respect be like it's the same thing. So you find a lot of us were parented out of fear and not necessarily respect. So it creates this dynamic where like you said, even healing and setting boundaries feels like dishonoring your parents. It feels like a betrayal. And it's because this thing has been normalized. Our parents even say that, because even them, they couldn't even speak up themselves. So it's like this cultural thing of reverence towards elders that has been perverse and has been made to be harmful, because it holds people back from accountability and continues to create this cycle of harm. Because how dare you speak up to an elder? Speaking up looks like disrespect, when it can really just be, let's have an actual honest conversation about the fact that what you're doing is harmful to me, and I know that you're not trying to harm me. The thing is also, when people get defensive like that, unaongelesha nani hivyo kwa nyumba ya nani, there's defensiveness, because a lot of the time people feel like, or parents would feel like, they are being attacked for their parenting. And this is also because they didn't have the language. So there was no language to hold space for two things existing at the same time. Like, I love you, but I'm not trying to have this conversation. I love you, but this is a boundary that I'm not going to let you cross. For them, it was like, and even you see our parents have issues with boundaries themselves. Like we carry beef for certain uncles and aunties because we see why they're being harmful to our parents. So we carry that beef, and it's because even them, they didn't have the tools to set boundaries. So the same way, even us, when we're starting to set boundaries, we feel a bit guilty, like we're doing something wrong. They do the same too. They feel the same way too.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a TikTok that usually says, I can't remember for sure the sound, but it's usually something along the lines of me, it's like someone doing an activity with their parents, and then the caption is always me realizing that my mom or my dad, uncle is experiencing life for the first time as
exactly.
well. Okay.
Like she's just a girl.
Yeah. So let's talk about emotional invalidation, especially in contexts where we have grown up being told you're too sensitive or that's not a big deal. So a scenario would be you cry, you express an emotion like sadness, and your parent says, and this is something all of us, okay, not all of us, but a good majority of us were told, acha kulia man takupea kitu ya kulia, you know?
Yeah.
All this, there's food on the table. What else would you possibly want?
Why are you stressed?
Yeah. So what long-term effects do these kinds of responses have on emotional regulation as adults?
One, you can't regulate something that you've been taught is bad, or that you have to hide. Because when there's emotional validation, what you internalize is that it's wrong to be feeling this way. Yeah. That I shouldn't be feeling this way, that I'm too much, that I'm being too sensitive. And so what you learn to do is to sweep things under the rug. So how are you going to regulate something that you don't acknowledge? You know? So you won't have the skills to regulate, and emotional regulation is a skill that is learned. It's not something that you come equipped with as a human being, just evil. Yeah. So it's a skill that you learn. And since our parents weren't able to because they didn't know how to regulate their emotions, then even us, we don't know how to. So you're invalidated. You're just going to sweep it under the rug. You're going to dismiss your own feelings. You're going to minimize your own feelings. Anytime you're feeling upset, it's just going to be like, but it's not that big of a deal. You start being the voice that you had consistently growing up. It starts coming from you instead of coming from them at some point. So now when we think of, now we have defined what emotional abuse looks like, and you know, this cultural silence, you know, the respect versus the fear, the minimizing, the guilt tripping, the emotional invalidation. How do these childhood patterns shape how we now start to relate? Because we've seen these effects manifest in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, and even just authority figures at work, or generally. So you come across people who can't accept compliments, who second guess everything, who are constantly anxious and constantly overthinking, even when they've done nothing wrong. So we want to see how these patterns can be connected to now emotional neglect in your childhood and how it manifests as an adult. Okay. So if you experience emotional neglect, invalidation, minimizing, abuse as well, you will find that, let me categorize them in different spaces, Please, So perhaps in friendships, you will find that you tend to be a people pleaser, or you tend to overfunction in your friendships, or you tend to be emotionally disappear, for lack of a better word. So this is where you become the therapist friend. You're overcompensating, you're apologizing for everything, you do all of that, you're taking care of people's needs at the expense of your own, or at least you dismiss your own, you hide your own. And that's what I mean by you become emotionally invisible. And it's you choosing to be emotionally invisible because you've internalized that you're too much. So in friendships, it can look like those things: over-functioning, people-pleasing, and becoming emotionally invisible. I would say in romantic relationships, it would look like hypervigilance. It could look like the avoidance of intimacy, because when you're being intimate, and this is not physical intimacy, it's emotional intimacy, right? When you're sharing in intimacy in that way, then that means you have to be vulnerable, and that means that that thing that you've been labeled as too sensitive will have to come out at some point. And there's the fear of being dismissed. There's also the risk of repeating the same patterns, right? So that means choosing or tolerating emotionally unavailable partners and things like that.
Yeah.
And then I would say with authority figures, there's a lot of seeking validation.
Yeah.
So instead of just being, you tend to perform, right?
Yeah.
So you're overdoing at work. And it's good. Excellence and the pursuit of excellence is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the point where you're taking away from yourself, you're trying to do more than you need to, just for the sake of showing that, like you deserve to be in this space, you know, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of seeking validation and overperformance and that kind of thing. And then with yourself, a lot of self-criticism. Your inner critic becomes very, very loud.
Yeah.
You may tend to neglect and invalidate your own emotions as well. So it's a lot of things. And of course, even these things that I'm speaking about can exist outside of the context of you've experienced emotional abuse and invalidation and all of those things as a child. So it can exist outside of that, but these are some of the effects that happen. Yeah.
Over time, yeah. So why do you think so many Kenyan adults, or just in African households, there's a crippling guilt? Already there's this, should I say, like an information overload on setting boundaries, but it becomes even more difficult when you're trying to create a healthy distance, or you're trying to say no to your parents. A good example is black tax. You say you can't help financially. You say you can't be able to attend said event. You say you don't want to visit this weekend, and you're met with, after everything I've done for you. So now you don't care, you know? So how do these responses reinforce the guilt in children who then subsequently become adults? Yeah.
Okay, so let's not forget that there's almost like a moral obligation to our parents, because we can understand the sacrifice and the things that they had to do for us. So because there's that moral obligation, you find that when you try that and then you're met with that response, then immediately your mind goes back to, I'm being a bad child.
Yes.
I'm not appreciating, I'm not having enough gratitude for the sacrifices and the things that my parents have done for me. And so that can hold you back from learning how to set those boundaries. Another thing is that, and I think this is now a barrier that now brings about such responses from parents, perhaps, when we're setting boundaries. And not even just parents, but just generally, let's say, elders. Is that boundaries are very individualistic, and family and the culture that we come from as well is very collectivist, right? So it's very, tuko pamoja and that kind of thing. But then it can be a bit unhealthy, because does that, just the fact that we are family and we need to stand together and we need to be together, does that mean that we are silent in the face of harm? Does that mean that we don't create boundaries in the places that are not meaningful to us, So you find that, and that's why you find even our parents, they don't set boundaries, even when they are pissed with their sister or who, wewe ndio utakuja upigwe hiyo kelele yote, uambiwe everything that your auntie has done or your uncle has done, but they're not able to set those boundaries, because boundaries inherently are a very individualistic thing in a collectivist culture. And then let's not forget, this may msini cancel na waomba,
this may ruffle some feathers.
Sometimes the way we set boundaries is very modeled by Caucasian culture.
Okay.
Yeah. Where the boundaries that we set, or that you can read that you should set, sometimes they don't make sense in our context.
Okay.
And they don't keep us safe. Remember, boundaries are meant to keep you safe. That's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to put you in this situation where you're ostracized, you're done what. They're supposed to keep you safe, right? And sometimes we may feel like for you to effectively be setting boundaries, you have to cut access, or you have to limit, you have to like go no contact or that kind of thing. But sometimes maybe it's just limiting access. Maybe it's just asking yourself, what does a safe relationship look like for me in this situation? So maybe it's not having certain conversations. Maybe it's not having as much access. Maybe it's, that kind of thing, as opposed to cutting everyone off and saying fuck you and fuck everyone, you know. So there's space to give grace, because the culture that we come from, really, we also don't want to be alone. So there's a way that you can set boundaries that is too rigid, that can be harmful to you in the long run. It feels liberating in this moment, and that's a thing that happens a lot, where when you've come from a place where you're super passive and you're learning to be assertive, chances are you're going to get into being aggressive accidentally, and then you'll come back to being assertive. As a passive person, most of what you've known is aggression. Everyone is walking all over you, right? So if you've come from a point where you have very porous and healthy boundaries where anything goes, it's very easy to get to this other side where I'm protecting myself. I'm so, you know, you put this wall up and now you're just an island, and like everyone is hurting me and everything, and that feeling is valid, but you don't have to put a wall over everything. So it's now finding a place where, what are the healthy boundaries? What's the midpoint that you can find where your boundaries are keeping you safe, but are not harmful to the relationships that you have? Am I making sense?
Yes. Okay. Now, there's something we had talked about earlier before filming, and we were saying, and this was in context for why I'm even dedicating this episode to the millennials and the late Gen Zs, because a lot of them are already parenting or hope to be parents one day. And we find ourselves in patterns that we carry from our childhoods into our own relationships, whether they are work, platonic or romantic. And we catch ourselves, like you said earlier, you catch ourselves using the same phrases you once hated hearing from your parents. So how can we break these cycles? This is in just to the fear of becoming like them.
I think that starts with a lot of self-awareness and not self-blame. And even this self-awareness also just exists with not blaming your parents. You can hold people accountable without blaming them. You can name what happened to you and how it made you feel without villainizing your parents. Because you naming is for you to take back agency over your healing, reclaiming your truth, and giving yourself that right and that freedom to heal. And every time you don't name it, or you invalidate it, or you minimize it, you're doing the same thing that your parents did to you. So you're also shutting yourself down, right? So it's important to first name what is happening. Name the things that happen to you, because you won't heal from something that you don't name. So you have to name it. You have to be very aware of the patterns, and this is coming from a place of also compassion, because if this is something that has happened to you and it has created impact, you're not going to be a better parent in 3 to 5 business days of knowing that there's an issue here. You have to be patient with yourself as well. So this looks like also hey, before I go there, I think one thing that I will say 521 times: stop waiting for the apology. Stop waiting for the apology, because the acknowledgement of what they did and the apology does not validate your pain. It doesn't. So it has to be you to validate. And so you naming it and you taking responsibility and accountability in that sense is saying that what my parents did harmed me, but it's my responsibility to fix it. Because when you're waiting for the apology, we think that when they apologize and they do better, we're going to be better. No, the impact is already done. So even if they apologize and do better, bado tuko hapo. You know, so you have to actually take responsibility on the healing journey yourself. It's important to also reparent yourself and be honest with yourself when it comes to these things, and examine, are you now parenting from a point of fear, or are you parenting from a point of trying to equip your children?
Okay, you have already taken over my that was my last point. How we should heal as adults when it comes to, you know, the emotional wounds that have been caused by our parents, and then especially in the context of growing up, our parents really were not apologizers or acknowledgers, or some even deny. Denial is a river in Egypt. Your husband is gay, so thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything you'd like to, you know, say before we close off this conversation?
Is there anything I'd like to say? Oh, I would want to add one thing. which may sound sijui how, but imagine grieve the parent that you thought you were going to have.
Okay.
Because when you're holding on to it, then you're holding yourself back from moving past and accepting that these are the cards you were dealt, and you just have to do with what you were dealt. You have to do, what you can with what you were dealt. And let's not die on the intention of intention does not negate impact. We understand that their actions had an impact, definitely, right? But we also can't take away from the fact that there was also intention at play. If I step on you accidentally, I will apologize because obviously the impact is that you've been hurt. However, you also can't cut me off because I've stepped on you. You know, in context, of course, there's some situations where I am pro-cutting people off, but in that case, let's not forget that in as much as intention does not negate impact, we also can't not hold space for intention. And is there anything else that I want to say?
Yes, just to add, you mentioned something, and this is for our parents.
Yes.
Not for our parents, but those of us who are parents or choose to be parents in the future.
Okay.
You said something about over-parenting. And, you know, even a lot of the content we consume on TikTok, there's a lot of gentle parenting. And there's always been that, you know, like debate about whether gentle parenting actually works. What are we doing for the next generation? Some people argue that allegedly after all the traumas we went through, we turned out just fine. So, yeah, I'm curious what you have to say about that.
I think gentle parenting is a good thing if it's done in the way that is helpful, because too much of everything can also be harmful. Right? So when gentle parenting comes from a point of coddling, comes from a point of overprotecting your kids, over-validating them, not allowing them to have their own experiences and really shielding them, it becomes permissive parenting. It's no longer gentle parenting, where you're just letting things happen and you're not equipping your kids to be able to manage the world. So when we are doing this over parenting, the gentle parenting that has gone too far, the permissive parenting, we're coming from a point of, I'm not going to let my kids feel what I felt. Valid. However, maybe a better place to come from is, I'm going to equip my kids to be able to manage when things go wrong, right? So, there's a space for you being gentle, having compassion, equipping them with emotional regulation skills, you know, all that kind of thing, without it being permissive and dismissive. And I think that's a risk that a lot of us are going to that's a risk of how a lot of us are going to parent, millennials and Gen Zs, because we are coming from a point of pain and hurt, right? And when we're coming from a point of pain and hurt, we are trying to protect our kids from that, but that protection can go overboard, where we forget to let them also have their own experience, let them also be hurt, let them also build resilience, let them also have, you know, difficult experiences that nurture resilience, that show them that they can go through things and, you know, life won't end. So that's what I'd say about overparenting and the risk for overparenting that I perceive that we may have.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, for gracing us with your presence. It's always a lovely time with you here. Maybe you can tell us where we can find you, if you'd like support in terms of like your practice, etc., whatever that looks like.
So you can find me on Instagram at wendy.matheka. I am on a social media break, so if you find that I've not responded to you, please understand. But you can email me as well on talktowendymatheka@gmail.com, or you could just go straight to my website and I should be able to reach you, which is wendymatheka.com. I don't think there's anything else. Okay,
thank you so much, Wendy. Now, as we said earlier, and I don't know if I gave out this disclaimer, that this episode we wanted to acknowledge those that have experienced traumatic or emotionally difficult childhoods, and we know that this episode may be triggering, so we see you and we empathize with you, but in the same breath, these conversations are necessary, not to stir up pain for the sake of it, but for us to seek clarity, peace, and healing. So thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you did enjoy it. And if you've reached this far, make sure you like this video, leave a comment down below, and of course, join our amazing SNS family. That's it from us, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.